So one quick announcement. So look at the spreadsheet which I have shared with you. Uh, the tab for attendance. So it has certain rows which are highlighted in parrot color, light green color. So according to me, all those are the students who are present on campus. So take a look if you are present on campus, but you are not highlighted there, let me know. Even if it's the other way around, let me know. So the VC has asked us to take the records of online and offline attendance separately. So that is for that particular purpose. Sneha is here. I can collect your, you can take it now. Okay. So, shall I start second row? Let me know when I can start. Shall I start? I have the permission and the attention. Okay. So we are starting with a new unit today, which is memory management. We'll mostly be talking about it for a couple of weeks from now, at least 2 weeks. So memory, as you know, is the second most important resource on our computers or on our systems. So which is the first most important resource? Anyone? Which is the most important resource? CPU, right? So we have already dealt with CPU. We have seen that how a CPU it is shared between different processes. So exactly one process can run on a CPU at a time, and CPU it serves all the processes based on various CPU scheduling algorithms. Now we are going to talk about memory, but before that, recall the instruction cycle of a CPU. So what were the three phases in instruction cycle? Fetch, decode, and execute, right? Now, when you look at this fetch phase, we know what is happening during the fetch phase. Right? So your control unit, it looks at the particular instruction, right? It looks at the instruction address register, I'm sorry, in the CPU, and it fetches a particular instruction in one of the CPU registers. What does decode do? Come again? It decodes the instruction. What do we mean by when we say it's decoding the instruction? What is happening there? It is fetching the operands, that is one thing. So that's again a memory access, right? So if you look at that instruction, it has the addresses for your corresponding operands. So you have to fetch those operands from the memory again. And one more thing, decoding the instruction, right? So the instruction can be about addition, subtraction, multiplication, so on and so forth, right? So you might be activating the corresponding circuits in your arithmetic and logical unit. So that also comes under it. And then it executes anyhow. And after execution, it also stores your result back in the memory. So if we look at a typical instruction cycle, you can actually look at it as these 6 steps. So in the first one, you are fetching the instruction. In the second one, you decode the instruction. So by decoding, I really mean here activating the necessary circuits. Third one is address generation. Now, this is slightly confusing. So we are saying at this particular third instruction, the CPU, it is evaluating the address. What does that mean? So it is evaluating the addresses of the operands specifically. And according to what we know till now, your instruction, it already has the address of the operands. So what is it really evaluating? If it has the address, it just have to go to that address and fetch the corresponding operands. So we'll talk about it, what it is actually evaluating there. That is the You can say one of the main objectives of memory management. The next one is fetch operands. Once it has evaluated the addresses, it goes and fetches those operands, it executes them, and it stores the result back. Now, if you look at this instruction cycle, there are 6 phases, and out of these 6 phases, 3 phases are about memory access. Like half of this instruction cycle is about accessing the memory and getting the desired data and instructions, right? As we know, our CPU, it performs billions of cycles per second. It executes billions of instructions per second. It means in 1 second, it is accessing your memory billions of times. So what are your expectations from your memory then? Memory is also essentially a piece of hardware, and now we know CPU, which is another piece of hardware, it is accessing this memory billions of times in a second. So what would you want out of your memory? Can you give me some pointers? What type of a memory would you want? Very fast, right? So we want our memory to be fast. CPU is very fast, right? So memory access should also be fast. What else? Efficient in what way? Power consumption, okay. What else? Okay, access, it is fast, right? So fast means that I can access it efficiently. That's why it's fast, right? What else? It shouldn't be expensive, cost. It should be cheap. Okay. It should have a longer lifetime because they have it should have a longer lifetime. Okay, let's say it should be robust. I would want it to be non-volatile, right? If I'm performing some operation and the electricity goes off, I would really want something to happen, right? So ideally, I would want my memory to be non-volatile. It should retain its contents even when electricity goes off and comes back. Okay, anything else? I would want it to be huge, right? It should be really big so that I can hold a lot of instructions and data. So it should be huge. It should be big in size, right? And then as we know that there is always a trade-off between all these things. Just like in data structures, you have trade-off between time and space. Less time means more space. Less space means more time. Okay. So ideally, we want a big, fast and cheap memory, which is also non-volatile, but that's not going to happen. So between which components do we have trade-off here? Let's list them. We have size, access time, what else? Cost. So where is the trade-off here? Cost and access time, size and time. Size and cost. Is there a trade-off between size and cost? Think about it. So if I increase the size of my memory, cost increases, right? If it is made up of the same substance or same material. So if I want more RAM, then definitely I'll have to pay more, right? There's a trade-off between everything, right? So if we increase size, the access time will increase, right? And I want a low access time. Okay. Now this access time might increase because of multiple reasons. As you increase the size, your search space will become bigger. So you'll have to look into more number of elements to find your desired data or instruction, right? And as I increase the size, if I'm talking about a particular memory, then cost will also increase. If I want more hard disks, I need more cost. If you want more RAM, you need more cost. That's why we have a number of these memories in our systems, and they are made up of different material. So I think we have discussed this picture before. So we have discussed all these kinds of memory before. So I'm just giving you a refresher here. So the fastest memory in our system, these are the CPU registers, and they are very small in size. So essentially, as you go down, your size, I'll say, is increasing. And as you go down, your access time is also increasing. Okay. And as you go down, what happens to cost? Decreases in this case. Right? Why does it decrease? Because of the material, right? Your hard disk is cheaper than RAM, right? And then your RAM, it is cheaper than the CPU registers. It's essentially because of the materials which they are made up of. So if you look at CPU registers, they are nothing but your pure flip-flops, right? They are pure transistors. If you look at cache memory, they are also mostly transistors and latches. If you come to main memory, there are some capacitors at those level, so which are a bit cheaper. And then as you come down to your hard disk and let's say magnetic disk, so they are made up of all the more cheaper material. So as you come down, the cost actually decreases. Okay. If you look at the CPU registers, so I would say CPU registers are roughly 2 times faster than your cache, 2 or 3 times faster than cache. Your cache it is 10 times faster than your main memory, and your main memory it's actually hundreds of thousand times faster than your hard disks. Right. Okay, so that's why we have this memory hierarchy. We have many types of memories in our system so that we can combine them and get all these features. We can get a huge storage space. We could get fast access and less cost. Typically, how many CPU registers would I have? Very less, so maybe hundreds, not more than that. Then I'll have a little bit more of cache memory, all the more of main memory, and then a huge hard disk. So as you know, main memory would be generally what in GBs, and your hard disk will be in terabytes. Okay. So let's now move to the technical aspect of it. So we know that whenever you write a C program, so most of the discussions will be doing them in context of the C programs. So let's say you have written this C program. What happens when you compile this program? It is shown here, right? An executable is produced, and this executable, it is stored on your hard disk, maybe in your C drive or D drive in Windows. And when you execute this executable, that is the time when we said that a process is created, and at that time is your instructions, they are loaded into the main memory or the RAM. Now the question is, look at the size of the executable and look at the size of this process in the RAM. Will they be of the same size, or which one will be bigger, which one will be smaller? Okay, let me repeat the question. Let's say I wrote a program named hello world.c, right? I compiled it, I got an executable which could be hello world.out or a.out, whatever. And then when you execute it, I know that during the execution time, it is loaded in the main memory. So my question is, if I look at the size of this process in the main memory, and if I look at the size of the executable on my hard disk, which one will be bigger and why? Or will they be equal? Hmm?
We send only the computations that we need, like the main computations, the addition, subtraction to the main memory. But all the other stuff will be there on hard disk. So the ones on the main memory will be smaller than the one on the hard disk.
Okay, any other answer? So what does an executable has? Let's think about it. What is an executable? So they contain the instructions in the binary format, right? And what are the different parts of a process in the memory? This we have discussed, right, previously. So what was this text part there? The instructions, right, which are to be executed. But in addition to instructions, a process needs more storage. Why? For computing stacks and heaps. So whenever you are writing a C program, you'll have certain instructions. So you might have an instruction which says int I equals to 5, int j equal to 6. As of now, they are just instructions. We know that during compile time, there is no storage which is allocated to a particular program. And then you might be adding I and j. So when will I and j allocated space in the memory? It's going to happen at the runtime. So your program in instructions, it might ask your system to allocate it a lot of space, especially if we talk about runtime allocation, the dynamic memory allocation. So when a process runs, this text part, it corresponds to all the instructions which it has to execute. In addition to the instructions, the process requires some more storage for storing the variables, for dynamic memory allocation, and for these global variables over here. Right, so definitely a process will be bigger in size in the main memory as compared to an executable. Executable is nothing but a set of instructions. The process has something more. It has a set of instructions and some storage in addition to that. Okay, given that this picture is now clear, now we know what will happen, how the CPU will execute instructions. It will look at the text portion, look at the first instruction, execute it, look at the second instruction, execute it, so on and so forth, right? Okay. So I just want to refresh the concept of cache over here, right? So what does the cache memory do? It's a faster memory, it's faster than RAM. So right now what I'm saying is whenever a CPU, it has to execute an instruction, it is reading it from the RAM, right? And that might take some time. RAM is slower than CPU. I want to make this process faster. So we introduce one more memory in between the CPU and the RAM, which is faster than RAM, which is the cache memory. And definitely cache memory, it is smaller in size than RAM. And what does the cache do? Store certain instructions and data. Which instructions and data will it store? Which are the frequently accessed ones and recently accessed ones and near, right? Which are near the other instructions. So when you look at this cache, it stores data and instructions based on temporal locality and spatial locality. So temporal is the one which most of you talked about. So whichever instructions and data which are being accessed frequently, I'll store them in cache. So next time whenever CPU it has to access an instruction or data, it won't go all the way to the main memory. It will first search it in the cache, right? And if it finds it, well and good. If it doesn't find it, then it will go and access the main memory. Spatial locality means the instructions which are together. So there is a good chance that these instructions which are contiguous, they will be executed by the CPU in the near time, right? So so we discussed about it also before. So instead of one instruction here, maybe I can just fetch 10 instructions and put them in the cache so that CPU can access them faster. Okay. And what is the problem in our use of cache? The cache coherence one. Right. So let's say there is some integer I which is sitting in the memory. Let's say in the stack part of your process, I have declared some temporary variable which is I, and now a copy of this I is produced in cache, right? And you are doing certain operations on this I. It need not be a read operation always. It can also be a write operation. So when your CPU it changes the value of I, it might be updating it in cache. Let's say it's increasing it by 1. So I is 5 in your main memory, but in your cache you have made it 6. So for some period of time, there is an inconsistency between what is there in the main memory and what is there in the cache. Anyhow, whenever you will flush this cache, you will remove this I from the cache, you will update it in the main memory to resolve this consistency. So just keep this concept of cache in mind. In this unit, we'll mostly be talking about the main memory, which is the random access memory. Why do we call it random access memory? You can access any address. So you can access it like an array instead of like a linked list, right? You know the location, you can just right away go there and access it. Okay. So what we'll be talking about are a few things. So till now we know that whenever I have to execute a program, it becomes a process and it sits in your main memory. So the first question is, where exactly will it sit? What will be the address of this process in the memory? Then second one, what happens if multiple processes are there in the memory? So operating system has to take care of that, right? All these processes, they should be disjoint, right? No one should override the space of, no process should override the space of another process. Another thing which is interesting is, so till now the picture which we have imagined of a process in the memory is something like this. So if this is the memory, and one process is created, so P1 will take this entire space. Okay. So till now what we have considered is whenever a process it comes in the memory, the picture looks something like this. So this entire process here, it is at one place in the memory. Can it so happen that this process is scattered all over the memory? So in another picture, let me say some part of this process is here, then some part is here, and then some part is here. And why do we even want that? Right? Why won't we want the entire process to sit at just one place instead of being scattered all over the place? And we'll see mostly how it is done is a process is scattered all over your memory. It's not at one place. Why does that happen? We'll talk about that. Okay. Third thing which we are again going to talk about is how our address is generated. Again, what you have seen in the CPU cycle. So what is happening there? And what do I mean by this address generation there? Okay. So on our systems, we actually have two kind of addresses. So till now, the one address, which all of us know are the actual memory addresses. So let's say I have a memory of, let's say 1 kilobyte, right? Although we have many gigabytes, just for the example sake, let's say it's an embedded device and you have a memory of 1 kilobyte. What will be the range of your memory addresses? So what will happen? This 1 kilobyte memory, we are going to imagine it like, you can imagine it like an array itself, right? And in this array, each location, it can hold 1 byte. So this is the first byte, this is the second byte, this is the third byte, right? And what are addresses? The location of a particular byte. So this is address 0, address 1, so on and so forth, right? So tell me what will be the last address here? So this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, so on and so forth. What will be the last address? So 1 KB is what? 1024 bytes. So what will be the last address? 1023, right? Because we are starting from 0. Right? So these are all the valid memory addresses. In operating system now, we have two kinds of addresses. So all of you must have heard about virtual memory and virtual addresses. So we are going to look at what those are. So the first one which you see here on the right hand side, all of these, they are the physical addresses. If you look at this memory currently, I have three processes here, A, B and C, and there is some space which is reserved for the operating system processes. So I have three user processes, you can say A, B and C. A starts at the physical memory location 400 and goes all the way up to probably 899. C starts from 1100, goes all the way up to 1399. B starts at 2000, goes all the way up to 2399. But we have something more which are called the virtual addresses. Now physical addresses are very easy to understand. Wherever a process gets loaded into the memory, corresponding to that we have a physical address. We also have virtual addresses. So virtual address for process A, you see instead of starting from 400, it starts from 0. So here it's always starting from 0. So for a process A, virtual address goes from 0 to 499. For process C, it goes from 0 to 299. For process B, it goes from 0 to 399, right? So I think it's very easy to see here what a virtual address is. So for any process, right, if it is, let's say, a 10 byte process, so your virtual address, it will go from 0 to 9, right? Always start from 0, goes to size of the process minus 1 in this particular case. Now the question is, why would you need virtual address? So I anyhow have physical addresses, right? Why would we want a notion of a separate virtual address here? It is easy for operating system to handle memory for the processes. Okay, any other ideas? That's right. So we'll see how it makes it easy for the operating system. Yes, so that's a very good point, right? So the idea is any process which is executing, it cannot directly access the physical memory. It can only generate a virtual address. So over time, we will see that your process, it has no idea of where where actually variables are in the main memory. Even when you print the addresses of your variables in your C program, those are the virtual addresses. They are not the actual physical addresses. Right? The only operating system knows about where actually those variables are. Okay. So that actually gives safety to our program, safety and transparency. So you won't know about your own addresses, then definitely you won't know about other processes' addresses. Right? Okay. One more thing here. So in this particular example, which we have seen, what can be the range of virtual address? It's always going to be less than the physical memory size. It's always starting from 0. Right? So even if a process takes up the entire memory, it cannot be more than the size of your memory. But in some of the memory management techniques, which we will see later on, you'll realize that your virtual addresses, they can actually be bigger than the size of your physical memory. So if you have 8 GB RAM, right, your process, it might spit out an address which exceeds 8 GB, right? So for a process, it will look like you have an unlimited memory or you have more than what you actually have. Right? So we'll talk about that. So operating systems, they provide you this convenience with which you would have heard about. You can actually execute a 4 GB process on a system having 2 GB RAM. Right? And how is that even possible? So whenever a process has to execute, it has to sit in the memory. So if memory is less than the size of a process, how do you execute a process? So we'll talk about that. Okay. So now coming to the part of address generation. So what did we mean by when we said that it has to see how your addresses are generated? Which addresses are we talking about here? So here is a simple C program, right? So I'm just adding 6 to the value of A and storing it in B, right? What will happen when I compile this program? You will get probably an assembly language code and finally a machine language code. So how will this code look like in assembly language? We are always going to talk at the level of assembly language and not machine language. Right? So you compile any C program, you'll always see instructions like load A, or let's say load R1 and certain address. So you are going to load the contents of this particular address in your register R1, right? So you'll have a lot of load and store instructions and even add and subtract instructions. And lot of these instructions will be having the addresses. Addresses of what? Mostly your variables, right? So the variables A and B in this case. So when you compile this program and you look at the assembly language code, which is not still running on your system, it is sitting on your hard disk. Even this code which is sitting on your hard disk, it is supposed to have certain addresses, right, for your variables, from where it is going to load and store them. So the question is, how are those addresses generated? Right? We call it address binding. You might have heard of it before. So there are 3 types of address binding. So there are 3 ideas for this. So one is you can do this address binding at the compile time. So what does that mean? When a compiler, it is compiling your program, compiler itself decides what should be the address of your variables. So your variables anyhow, they are going to be stored in the stack part of your process. But again, in that stack part, what is going to be the exact address of your variable? Right? So if you do it at the compile time, compiler will tell you, okay, the address for your variable A is going to be this, B is going to be this, and compiler will give you the actual physical addresses. Right? So it might say, okay, store R1 from the location, let's say 1001 in the memory. Right? So if you look at your program in hard disk, it will look something like this. What is the problem with this approach? With the compiler spitting out the actual addresses of your variables. Okay, it doesn't provide safety. So compiler is directly giving you the addresses of physical memory. What else? It's kind of hard coded, right? So what is happening even before your program is running, right? It doesn't know where it's going to be loaded, but your compiler is spitting out the address. Okay, the address for this particular variable should be this. What if during the time of loading that address is already occupied by some other process? That has to be taken care of. What if there are two programs and when you compile them, two variables, they have exactly the same address? What will you do in that case? You'll have to take care of all those things, right? So this, if compiler gives you addresses, the system is very inflexible, I would say, right? So we generally do not use that kind of binding. Second binding which can be done is load time binding, which is done by loader. So you might have heard about loaders and linkers. Do you remember them? They are the typical steps in when you compile and run a program. So loader is an operating system module. Its only function is to bring your process from the hard disk and load it to the memory. So loader is loading your program from hard disk to memory, right? So what will happen when you do the address binding at the load time? This time now compiler is not going to generate the actual physical addresses. It will generate virtual addresses or the relative addresses. So it might say that address of the variable A is 12. That actually means from wherever your program starts. So assuming that the program starts at the memory location 0, the address for the variable A should be 12. Similarly, address for the variable B should be 17. Right? So if you look at your assembly language instructions, your addresses will look like this. And what the loader will do? So loader knows that during runtime, what is the starting location for a particular process? So let's say the starting location for a process is going to be 376. It is determined by your operating system where it is going to load. What loader has to do? It just has to add this 376 to every address. Right? It has just to modify that code which is in the assembly language, and so this address, it is called the base address of a process. The particular address from where the process starts occupying the space in the memory. So loader can change each of your assembly language instructions, add the base address in it, and then execute the program. What is the problem with this approach? Here everything looks fine. So this approach is a very subtle problem.
I mean, we can use the operating system inside that to store the variables.
Okay, so the idea here is this 1217, it's sort of not hard coded here. So your compiler tells you, okay, this is the relative position. Anyhow, somehow you'll have to generate this relative position where you want your variable to be, right? It has no notion of what the base address is going to be during the runtime. This one is determined by the operating system, right? And what we are doing is, before loading the process in the memory, we are modifying the entire assembly language code, right? And every address is sort of incremented with this base address. You add this to every address in the program. Right? It's hard coded in the sense that now you cannot change these addresses during the runtime. Right? Once you have loaded the code, all these addresses now become hardwired. And what problem it can have? So processes, do you think will they remain of the same size when they are in the memory? No, right? So these two portions, if you see in your process, this diagram here, the stack and heap, right? They can grow with time. The other part, right? The global variable, the data and the text part, they are remaining to be the same. They are going to be the same during the process life cycle. But these two parts, stack and heap, they can grow. So when a process is executing, you might ask for more memory, or you might call a function a lot of times. So when you call particular function a lot of time, or you have a recursive function call, it will increase the size of your stack. So the idea is, whenever a process it is executing, it can change its size. And now what is the problem if you do this address binding during the load time? Let's say I loaded a process. Okay. So let's look at this like this. So let's say a process A came, you start it at from the location 0, you load it in the memory. So here is A running, right? Then comes a process B, you load it in the memory, it is running, comes C, it is running, right? So A, B and C, they are contiguously allocated space in the memory. Now this process B, it needs more memory. What will you do? So B is, let's say, running from 12 to 20, address is 12 to 20, and when this B is running, right? And all the instructions have been hard coded by now by the loader, so you know the exact address of the variables in B. But while running, B wants to change its size. It cannot take any space above, it cannot take any space below, because A and C are using them. So the idea is a process that should be able to move during its execution. Right, you'll actually search for some other space in the memory and you'll relocate B there. So this is called relocation. If you are doing an address binding at the load time, you won't be able to do this relocation, right? Because now again you'll have to change all those addresses, and how will you change them? Your virtual addresses are lost. You have already changed your assembly language program. So generally what we use is something called runtime binding. What we do there, it is quite similar to the load time binding. So the only difference is, instead of actually changing all the assembly language instructions, we introduce two more registers in the CPU, right? Two registers. So whenever we are talking about any approach, right, we should always take care of how much more expense we are introducing in the system. So here I am introducing two more special purpose registers in the CPU, which are base register and a limit register. I'll talk about limit register later. Let's talk about this base register. So every process will have a base register. What will it hold? The base address. Right? Now I do not need to change anything inside the instructions of my program. Whenever a process is loaded, you upload the contents of this base register in the CPU. Right? What will happen? Whenever CPU it has to execute a particular instruction, or if it wants to fetch a particular data from an address, it simply have to add the contents of this base register to that address, and it gets the actual address. Right? So we are not changing the instructions, just we are, you can sort of say, storing this particular data, which is the base address, in a separate register. Now how can I relocate a program? So let's say I now B, initially it started from 12. So initially the base register for B, it was having this value of 12. Right, now I need to relocate B. I relocated it to a new address. What is the only thing I need to change? The base register. Right, so now I'll just change base register to some other value, let's say 201. So it's now saying B is now moved to some other space in the memory, and now that space starts from 201. And anyhow, whenever the CPU it wants a data, it is now going to add 201 to the virtual address. So this is the first memory management technique, the most basic one which you can use. Now, okay. So this is a diagram which shows you how it is happening, right? So here I have the CPU. This logical address is nothing but your virtual address. Virtual address is also called logical address. So the logical address is 346. The contents, the base register, it is also called the relocation register. And because it is helping you relocate a program, so we also call it the relocation register. This is your virtual or the logical address. Whenever I want a particular address, what CPU has to do? It simply had to add the contents of this logical register in the relocation register, and you get your physical address. Okay. Now, whenever we propose any technique for memory management, we have certain objectives in mind, and these are the 4 objectives which we would always want to achieve. So the first one is transparency. Transparency means that your process, it should not be concerned about what is the exact physical address your process will take in the memory, right? It should also safety. Safety means that one process, it should not be able to access the contents of some other process, right? So, and also of the operating system, definitely. Okay. Third one is efficiency. Efficiency means, so see, when we had that first approach where compiler was spitting out the addresses of the actual memory locations, right? And then we introduced the concept of virtual memory or virtual addresses. When we had these virtual addresses, we had to introduce 2 more registers in the CPU, right? Only one of which we have talked till now. I'll talk about the second one. So we have introduced this register called base register or the relocation register. Right, so we should also look at the ease of implementation and also the cost of implementation. Whenever I'm coming up with new memory management technique, how much cost is my system incurring, or how how easy is it in terms of computation? How many extra computations am I doing? So till now, see what I'm doing now, every now and then, whenever I have to access a memory location, whenever the CPU has to access a memory location, till now it is doing one more operation. Previously, it could directly go to that memory address and fetch the operands. Now what it has to do? It gets the virtual address from the instruction. So it has to add the contents of the base register to that. So for every memory access, it is doing one addition. Right? Every memory access, I have introduced a cost of one addition there. Okay. I'll talk about these 2 points later. So coming to the second register, it is called the limit register. It actually helps you implement the second point here, which is safety. So what the limit register does is, let us say there is a process in the memory, and let's say it runs from the physical address from 12 to 20, and let's say 12 to 19, and the base address from 0 to till where will it go? 17, right? So this one is the virtual address, this one is the physical address for this corresponding process. Right? So whenever a process says address 15, how the CPU is going to compute it? It's going to add this 12 to 15, right? Okay, what if this process which is generating its virtual address, it generates a virtual address of 100. So if the size of this process is 17 bytes, let us say, it is supposed to generate virtual addresses from the range 0 to 17, right? But what if it erroneously, or let's say intentionally, produces a virtual address which is bigger than its size? It means that, so if now it tries to access the virtual address 100, it will actually collapse. It will, what I would say, it will collide with the address of some other process. That should not be allowed. Right? So whenever a compiler, whenever a process it is generating any virtual address, it should be within that bounds. And those bounds, they are decided with the help of another register, which is called the limit register. So in addition to base register, we have one more register, which is limit register, which decides the range of virtual addresses for a particular process. Right? Most of the times it will be equal to the size of the process. So what will happen now? Whenever CPU is going to see a logical address. When it sees a logical address, before adding it to the relocation register contents, it's going to compare it against your limit register. It will proceed only if the virtual address which is generated, it is less than limit register. If it is greater than limit register, it will raise an error. Otherwise, it will go forward, add the contents of the relocation register, that will give you the actual physical address. Right? Okay. So this one provides safety. Okay. You should. Limit register, I think its value can change in case the process size grows. So there are certain rules for that. According to my knowledge, the maximum size which your process can have in memory, it is 4 gigabytes. So it might be affected by that. But then I think if a process it is having lesser size, then the value of limit register will be quite less. Okay. Now notice one thing here. So all these things, they are being managed by the operating system, all these relocations which are being done. So you as a programmer or your process, they have no knowledge of this. So see what kind of abstraction it is providing to your system. Whenever you are running a process, and let us say you are writing a linked list program, and you are allocating this dynamic memory every now and then, maybe over a time your entire process, it relocates to some other physical address. Right? But you will have no knowledge about that. All of this, it is happening at the operating system level. Even if you print the addresses of your different nodes. So let's say there was a time when in your linked list you had 2 nodes, and there is a time when you have 2 lakh nodes in your linked list. Addresses for you, they will remain the same. The address for the second node, it's going to remain the same for you, because for you it is the virtual address. Maybe these nodes in the actual physical addresses, they are changing their locations, but for you it's going to remain the same. Okay. Still, there is one problem with this relocation here. So this relocation register, it helps us to relocate the program in the sense that it helps us to generate the addresses, but still this relocation is costly here, right? You have to copy the contents of this entire process from one position in the memory to some other position in the memory. So that copy is still going to take a lot of time. And then till now we haven't talked anything about shared memory. Right, so we talked about shared memory in the last lecture. These processes, they share memory. So this particular kind of memory management, it doesn't allow two processes to share memory. Right? So what is happening? If a process, it has any particular virtual address, it will be mapped to a particular physical address. So in no way we have implemented that there are two virtual addresses belonging to two different processes and they could somehow map to the same physical address. We do not have that functionality as of now. So if you remember when we talked about the extern variable in C, what we said is we use virtual memory. So the idea is two processes, they can have even two different virtual memory addresses. So it can have a virtual memory address of 3 for that variable. It can have 4, but somehow they map to the same physical memory. So that is how sharing of variables is done. Till now, we have no notion of sharing variables. Every virtual address, it corresponds to a particular physical address. It's kind of a one-to-one mapping as of now. Okay. Let's talk about a few more problems with this approach. So till now, all the memory which we are allocating, it is contiguous, right? A process, it resides at same place. We are not breaking a process in different parts and then scattering it all over the memory. So what problem can contiguous memory allocation have? So look at this figure. So I have, let's say, these three processes running in the memory, process 1, 2, 3, and then process 2 terminates, right? Then you see what happens. So this entire space is free now. This is the only space which is free in your memory now. Next process 4 comes, process 4 is going to come and sit over here, right? This becomes the free space now. So these free spaces in the memory, we call them holes. So when no process is running in your memory, before you even boot your system, there is like one big hole. And when the system boots, operating system processes come, then more processes comes, and the number of holes start increasing. You'll have more and more holes. These holes can actually give you certain problems. Okay, one more thing here. So to implement this thing, right, process 2 is executing, process 2 is finished, it releases the memory and you have a hole. Operating system will need to keep a track of it, right, because when this process 4 comes, operating system has to decide, right, where it will be allocated this memory. So all this bookkeeping needs to be done. How much of memory is free, which exact addresses of memory is free, and where can you allocate the address to a new process. So this is done with the help of this partition table, which is again managed by your operating system. So partition table, it keeps care of which memory addresses are free, where are actually, you can say where exactly are the holes in your memory which you can use for the new process. When you do such a thing, now one question comes. So let's say a whole lot of processes are executing in your memory and then some of them leave. Now all these processes which leave, they create holes in your memory. Now a new process comes, it's going to occupy one of the hole, and now the question is which hole should it be? You have to come up with an algorithm for that, or will you randomly allocate a process anywhere? Will that approach work? So let's look at it with an example. Let's say at a particular time, so definitely when you boot your system, entire memory is a big hole. So right now I'm only addressing the user space, right? Operating system space is separate. So in this user space, let's say there are certain processes which are executing, certain other processes which left, and let's say the layout of your memory looks something like this. So this place, it is occupied, let's say, by a process 1. And then you have some space left here, and then you have a process 2, right? And then you have this one big space here, right? Let's say it is occupying 2 kilobytes. Let's say this one is also 2 kilobytes. This part is also 2 kilobytes. So this is a hole, this is a hole, and this is a hole. This one, let's say, is 4 kilobytes, and this one, let's say, is 8 kilobyte. So this is the memory layout at a particular time. So probably there was some process which was sitting here. It has finished the execution, it left. So now you have this whole left in the memory. Now the question is, let's say a new process comes in the memory, and let's say the size of this process is 1.5 kilobyte. Now the question is, where should this process sit? So any ideas on this? So I have three holes, 4 kilobytes, 2 kilobytes, and 8 kilobytes. Right? Now operating system has to decide what should be the address for this new process. What strategies can we use? Just a second, yes. It needs 1.5 KB. Okay, we can use this one. Or, so this seems like the best, right? So this policy is called the best fit also. Its name is best fit. Why did we use 2? It's the closest one, right? It required 1.5. I looked at the hole which is like closest to it, big enough to accommodate this process, and I'll allocate it there. Okay. So I'll tell you there are two more policies. So one is first fit. So first fit says just start from the beginning, and whenever you find a hole big enough to accommodate the process, allocate it, right? So I could also have kept this process over here according to the best fit policy. Now both of these policies, best fit and first fit, has their advantages and disadvantages, right? Why would I use first fit and not best fit? Fast execution, that's what you said, right? So in the first fit, I just have to, start scanning from the very beginning of the memory, and whenever I find a hole big enough, I can allocate it. But if you are using first fit, you have to inspect each and every single hole in the memory, and accordingly you are going to allocate one to your process. Right? So in the worst case, even your first fit will take order and time. In the worst case, even the best fit will take order and time. Now you can actually smartly make your best fit order of log n time. Any idea how? It's just a search I am doing, right? So if you could actually use a binary search here, so you can make it from order of n to order of log n. How? So if you have a separate, let's say, data structure in your memory, which sort of keeps track of all these holes in ascending order, right? Then you can implement it in order of log n. There is one more policy which is called the worst fit. And you should think about why it is used. So worst fit says that it's just opposite to the best fit. Look at the biggest hole in your memory. So in this case, the biggest hole is this one, and you use this biggest hole to allocate this space to your process. And why should you even do that?
Will there ever be a possibility where you fit a process into a block and the hole is so small no other process is fitting it?
That is a problem. We are coming there. Yes, it is very much possible.
You have 1.9 kilobyte and this 0.1 kilobyte and there is no process that takes that much, but there's still a hole there.
Very good point, right? So that actually happens when you implement best fit. So you can see that here, exactly what you are talking about. So let's say there was this this entire space available. Process 0 takes this much. So this much is now free. This much is also now free. This much is free. This much is free. So there are all these small holes in the memory. None of these holes is big enough to hold a process, but together they are big enough to hold a process. So something bad is happening here. So let's say together all of these holes, they make up 2 kilobytes, and I have a process of, let's say, 1.5 kilobytes. I have this much space, or even let's say 2 kilobytes. I have this much space to give to a process, but I cannot actually give it because I do not have this at the same place. So that is one of the drawbacks of contiguous memory allocation. This is called external fragmentation. So for now, forget about the word external. We'll see what is external, what is internal. This is called fragmentation. And we'll discuss about the solutions of this tomorrow.